Welcome back to the 2026 APAICS Energy and Commerce Summit. I'm Tanya Layden, Vice President of Development and External Affairs. Our next panel is Jobs of Tomorrow, Building a Green Workforce for the Future. As the United States continues its transition toward a clean energy economy, policymakers and industry leaders must ensure workers and communities are not left behind. This panel will explore strategies for green workforce development, retaining and retraining displaced workers, and expanding access to emerging industries. I'm thrilled to introduce our first speaker for this panel, CAPAC Executive Member Congressman Bobby Scott, representing Virginia's 3rd Congressional District. Congressman Scott serves as the ranking member on the House Committee on Education and Workforce, and also serves on the House Committee on the Budget. Please welcome Congressman Bobby Scott to the summit.
Hi, I'm Congressman Bobby Scott, and I represent the 3rd District of Virginia. I'm the lead Democrat on the House Committee on Education and the Workforce and a proud member of the Congressional Asian Pacific American Caucus. Thank you for inviting me to discuss how we can build a green workforce that is well equipped to fight global warming. Our communities, our country, and our planet are facing an uncertain future. All too often, we hear that we have to choose between providing good-paying jobs and protecting our environment. But we know that's a false choice. Through proper incentives, investments in job training, and the strengthening of workers' rights, we can build a workforce that stands the test of time and contributes to the fight against global warming. We know that we must use every tool at our disposal to protect our environment for future generations. And this just isn't good for the environment, it's good for the economy. Skilled union jobs are critical to the development of clean energy projects, such as energy-efficient manufacturing, offshore wind, and electric vehicles. And unions are critical in giving workers a seat at the table to advocate for low-emission, climate-resilient jobs. Unfortunately, the Trump administration has launched relentless attacks against workers, tipping the scales in favor of billionaires and corporations, stripping away organizing rights, and shielding bad employers from accountability. That's why we must pass the Protecting the Right to Organize Act, or the PRO Act, which makes it easier for workers to organize, holds law-breaking employers accountable, and cracks down on union-busting tactics. In doing so, it empowers workers to bargain for higher pay, better benefits, and safer workplaces. Now, whenever we create green jobs, we must also create pipelines so that young people and displaced workers have the opportunity to reap the benefits. And that's why we must take steps to bolster our workforce. Chronic underinvestment in our workforce systems has led to fewer training opportunities, longer wait lists, and essential services that are unavailable to the very people that need them the most. If we're serious about lowering costs, creating green jobs, and building an economy that works for everyone, we must reinvest in workforce development. And that's why I have long supported expanding the use of Pell Grants for short-term training programs. Workforce Pell Grants have the potential to be transformative to low-income students and workers seeking to quickly gain in-demand green energy skills. Lastly, each year, hundreds of thousands of workers count on registered apprenticeships to learn in-demand skills. Registered apprenticeships provide job seekers with the paid, on-the-job training they need to pursue high-quality employment opportunities and provide employers with a stronger pipeline of talented employees. As we see new technological innovations continue to spread, registered apprenticeships are more important than ever to ensure that job seekers are prepared for the future. At the end of the day, the path to green future starts with the workers who make new innovations possible. We could not have gotten this far without your advocacy, and I look forward to seeing what we can build together for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Scott. Next, I'd like to welcome CAPAC Executive Member Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, representing Washington's 7th Congressional District. She sits on the House committees on the Judiciary, Foreign Affairs, and the Budget. Please welcome Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal to the summit.
Hey everyone, I'm Congresswoman Pramila Jayapal, and I'm honored to represent Washington's 7th Congressional District. Thank you to the Asian Pacific American Institute for Congressional Studies for inviting me to share a few words at today's Energy and Commerce Summit. The discussion about building a green workforce for the future could not come at a more important time. Instead of taking on the massive effects of climate change that we see all around us, all around the world, the Trump administration has cozied up to big oil billionaires and shut down many of the important investments that we made into our green energy future under the Biden administration. For the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander community, there is a deep and critical intersection with the environmental justice movement. Many of those in the AANHPI community are on the front lines of the climate crisis in areas that are disproportionately affected by environmental hazards. Asian Americans are at disproportionately greater health risk for hazardous air pollutants that cause cancer. Local Chinatowns have been demolished for new developments that result in traffic congestion and air pollution and noise pollution. Southeast Asian refugees and immigrants who rely on fishing for food are dealing with increasingly contaminated bodies of water where fish contain higher levels of mercury and other contaminants that are detrimental to health. We need to make our AANHPI voices loud in fighting for solutions to these problems. For too long, AANHPI communities that suffer the burdens of climate change are actually left out of the conversations, despite the fact that we contribute so much to research, activism, and public policy that drives the environmental justice movement. Asian American activists have been at the forefront of studying environmental racism, regulating pesticides, and passing legislation to mitigate carbon pollution by big polluters. In Congress, I'm so proud to be the lead sponsor of the Climate Resilience Workforce Act. This legislation would make bold investments in providing funds for local communities to build real climate resilience. It would also build a skilled and diverse workforce that can prepare for and respond to the climate crisis while creating millions of good-paying union jobs that center the very communities who are most impacted. The Inflation Reduction Act of 2022 secured some big wins, from making the biggest investments in taking on climate change and funding Black and Brown communities across the country to do so, to instituting a prevailing wage provision that would require publicly funded projects to fairly pay workers at rates at or above industry standards, as well as an apprenticeship provision that requires these projects to employ apprentices to help build our green workforce. Particularly as AI proliferates, we need more programs that invest in our workforce, and building clean, green projects from housing to infrastructure is one important way to do that. The fight against the climate crisis is going to take all of us. It's a fight about jobs, justice, and decarbonization. And the AANHPI community has so much to contribute to it and so much to benefit from it. We can create good-paying union jobs and build a stronger, greener economy, all while protecting communities vulnerable to climate change. So thank you for being here today and for continuing to demand a real Green New Deal that lifts us all up.
Thank you for those remarks, Congresswoman Jayapal. I'm pleased to introduce our moderator, Susan Jin Davis. Susan is the former Chief Sustainability Officer at Comcast and the former Social Impact Officer at Roker Entertainment. Previously, she also served as the chair of the APAICS board. Please give a warm welcome to Susan and our panelists.
As climate issues continue to challenge the world, we know one way we can address this challenge is by continuing to transition toward a clean energy economy and to greening our workforce. And as we integrate environmentally responsible and sustainable solutions into what we do, industry leaders, innovators, and policymakers must ensure that workers and communities are not left behind. Partnership, collaboration, best practice sharing, outreach, all of this is needed to happen to make a green economy a fair and just economy. It's also important to note that the poorest, most marginalized communities in the United States, including in the AA and HPI community, they bear the brunt of climate impacts in the form of poor air and water quality, extreme weather conditions, inadequate housing, food insecurity, food deserts, and so on. This panel will explore strategies for green workforce development, retaining and retraining displaced workers, and expanding access to emerging industries. Panelists will also talk about how to ensure that Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander community members are represented in the jobs of the future and can thrive in this green economy. So let's welcome our esteemed panelists. First, we have Manasseh Santos, Director of Trades for the Hawaiian Council, Pin Ni, President of Wanxiang America Corporation, and my Sistla, Senior Climate Policy Advisor, Aspen Policy Academy, Aspen Digital. Welcome to all of you. So let me start with Pin. If you could set the stage for the conversation by talking about what are the green jobs you are seeing today in the industry, and what are the opportunities for the near future in this area?
Thank you, Susan. Great honor to be here. So this reminds me, as you say, the transition is taking place. There's no question. And 2010, when we were building our first solar panel in Rockford, Illinois, the governor of Illinois came, and I remember in his speech, he was talking about instead of the blue color and the white color, he called the future workers the green color. So he's very correct. And we see a lot of movement. Again, when the industry grow, and it will drive the demand for the workforce. And today, I just saw in the newspaper, in the last month in China, the EV sales now is more than double of the combustion engine vehicle sales. And although we're not there yet, but it's coming as well. And we have a lot of farmland. We used to grow, corn, soybean in the Midwest. Today, we see tremendous opportunity for, a developer come to ask for if they can build a solar farm. So, we've been working with a union on the job training because we try to put a more solar panel out, especially in the community. I'm not talking about utility scale. I'm more talking about microgrid. But clearly, the installation, for the solar farm is kind of falling a little behind because we have the demand, we have the panel. Those are more industrialized in terms of panel production. But installation, you check with the local installer, they're not quite there yet. So we do see a lot of demand coming to the market, and you can talk with many others. For example, battery industry, and we see several major plants have announced expansion, but I was told at least they have skilled worker is a bigger challenge to them as well.
So we're talking about solar construction jobs, jobs in terms of batteries and battery technology, the movement from, combustion vehicles to EV. So that's kind of more of a transition, making sure that the maybe existing workers have additional skills that will address that new need. And I know that you're also concerned about policies. So what kinds of policies are needed so that these jobs can actually happen and they can happen in a fair way? Like what are the policies that you care about?
Again, I'm from for-profit business. So from what we can see, first of all, we need to allow the industry to grow. If the industry doesn't grow, then obviously there's no job. However, on the other side, when the industry does grow, then you need to have the ecosystem to be able to support that trend. So today, as I say, we do. I mean, again, nothing's perfect. You're not going to see all simultaneously, whatever. But I think the awareness, first of all, for in our community college, in our education system, we need to get the people fully aware and fully engaged in those movement. I mean, again, you can say this is still industrial, it's still manufacturing job, whatever that is. That's fine, but it does require special skill. For example, as I say, the installation. It's not just you can turn it on. Like you just do the wire. There's inverters. There's transformers that you have all to deal with. So there are special skills, but we need to first of all increase the awareness. I don't think we have enough training right now in our education system. And third, obviously, if we can work with, the business can help to support those, I call the local ecosystem. If you don't have that one, then it's going to be difficult because you're talking about industry with no roots in the local community. So there are many things that can be done.
And I've got the perfect person for you to talk to this issue from the Hawaiian Council. So Nas, tell us a little bit about how your organization is going to be able to address what Pen's talking about, right? Which is, how do we make sure our workforce is ready for these new jobs? And talk about how your organization is actually doing that workforce development. And you talk about this concept of a hybrid workforce-centered approach. So I'd love to turn it over to you to answer Pen's questions.
Yeah, thank you, Susan. Yes, so for the Hawaiian Trades Academy, readiness to us means two things. The training has to connect to a real job in the industries that exist here, but it also has to prepare people for what they can expect, right, in both the job industry trends, but also making sure that it makes sense for what's occurring here in Hawaii. And so everything that Pin was saying was right on point with what we are trying to do at the Hawaiian Trades Academy. Every year, the job market itself is consistently expanding, right? You have different industries, especially within the green industry. And so how are we within the Hawaiian Trades Academy? How do we make sure that we prepare our people here in Hawaii for these types of jobs? And so I really liked how you referenced the hybrid workforce model that I had kind of shared a little bit about a few weeks ago. And so we're actually getting ready to launch our first ever Home Resilience Workforce Academy. And what it is at the base level, it's a skilled trades pre-apprenticeship. It's primarily focused on carpentry, building trades. And the reason why it's hybrid is because we're not just preparing people for this one skill, right, to fast track them into the unions, to prepare them for employment. It's hybrid because we're actually phasing in HAZWA per 40 certifications, different safety certifications within this academy as well. The idea is we want to prepare these workers not just to secure employment, but to be resources in these communities that are highly susceptible to natural disasters. So within the past 6 months, we've had Kona low systems that have heavily hit our islands here in Hawaii. Within the past few years, back in 2023, we've had the wildfires that devastated Maui. And so we know that these natural disasters are coming, but how do we mitigate the effects from these disasters? How do we prepare our workforce? And this is the answer. We need to make sure that our people here are resilient. We need to make sure that the infrastructure is resilient. And this is why we would like to offer the Home Resiliency Workforce Academy. So this is a partnership with the Hawaiian Trades Academy and also Mauli'ea. Mauli'ea is also a program here within our organization at Hawaiian Council. And so they focus on energy sovereignty, but also home resiliency. So it just made so much more sense for us to partner together because they will actually be providing us with the homes that our students, when it comes to the hands-on training portion of the program, they will actually be able to go to these homes within these communities across Hawaii, specifically here on Oahu, that are very susceptible to natural disasters. They're in these zones to where these natural disasters hit, they will feel the blunt force of those effects. And so this overall idea is to, one, prepare them with the certification so that they can be ready to respond to natural disasters, prepare them for employment by equipping them with the correct training, preparing them for what they're going to face in the industry when they get into these jobs, but also they're learning all this from industry experts that will be contracting as instructors. And so this is the model that we would like to move forward with. Although it is a pilot program, we are anticipating, there's going to be a lot of people who are interested, and hopefully we can get a lot more stakeholders that would like to support what we're trying to build here within the Hawaiian Trades Academy.
Now, given Pin's points on the state of play for green jobs and the need for policies that promote a green economy, and then NASA's discussion around workforce development, from your seat, what is the state of affairs for these opportunities for sustainability in the policy arena? How are you seeing the climate, so to speak, of the climate issues?
Yeah, so I think one of the major issues that I think the environmental and the climate community really needs to grapple with is that I think everyday folks aren't necessarily seeing the benefits of a clean energy project themselves. And there's a variety of reasons for this. So one, clean energy projects take a long time to be built because of various permitting rules. I just talked to someone who worked in the solar industry last week who was saying that the average solar project in one of their states that they were working in takes between 8 and 10 years to actually get built. So if you're talking about a community who's living in a place where a solar energy project is being potentially sited, if it takes 8 to 10 years to get this built, you're not seeing the benefits of the jobs right away. So I think one of the things we really need to work on is trying to get these jobs, these projects built more quickly so communities can see the benefits right away. And I think that would help with some of the disconnect we're seeing where there are communities that are a little bit wary of these projects getting sited near them because they are not necessarily seeing the benefits as quickly as they potentially could be. This was also a huge problem, frankly, with the Inflation Reduction Act, where there was a bunch of money that was doled out for clean energy projects, but a bunch of those projects didn't end up getting built because of these various permitting challenges. So one, I think that is something that the energy community really and the government really needs to grapple with, like getting these projects built quicker so we can see some of these job benefits to local communities. Second, I think there is a real need to make sure when projects are being built that the community does benefit. So there is something called a community benefits agreement, which are basically legally binding contracts between project developers and either local governments or community groups that essentially has the developer committing to specific community benefits like local hiring guarantees, like having certain living wages, like having affordable housing, having potentially environmental mitigation if the project they're talking about might have negative consequences in other sort of arenas. So I think these community benefits agreements are a really great way to ensure that local communities are going to benefit from job opportunities. So for example, we have worked, my think tank, I work at a think tank called the Aspen Institute, where we train local community members and organizations to have a greater say in some of these decisions. And we worked with a group called Appalachian Voices, which is an environmental NGO in Appalachia, basically helping them advocate to the Virginia legislature to mandate some of these community benefits agreements and also mandate that communities are actually included in citing decisions before a project is being cited. So I think that's the second point is like, even if this project does get cited, you need to make sure that local communities benefit. And one way to do that is through these. I was just going to say third, I think it's really important for communities just, again, to have a bigger say in what's happening in their communities. I think oftentimes communities can feel like things are happening to them and not that they are part of the decision-making process. So I think governments need to do a better job of listening to local community members. So do project developers. And that's sort of where programs like what we run at the Aspen Policy Academy, where we help elevate community voices and really make sure they're able to deliver some of their concerns to government clearly.
So, Pin, how are you feeling about Mai's points around that it takes so long for these projects to actually happen? I mean, are you feeling that where you sit? And have you seen any place do this well? Are there best practices in terms of how to get that process expedited, how to make sure it's streamlined? So again, the project gets done and we have clean energy opportunities, as well as having the community see the benefits of those projects, of those investments. What are you seeing?
Yeah, I would say, there are two sides of the coin, right? So on one side, yes, as the new industry taking place, and a lot of people are learning, and not everybody can move at the same speed as we just talk about it. And even from the government perspective, permitting, just very simple. But if the government doesn't know what is could be the consequence, what could be the requirement, what could be the pro and the con, so those permitting could take a long time, especially in the local community when those projects could have a significant impact to the community. So that's on the one side. So it's not just taking the time. I would say this probably as a part of the learning curve that we need to overcome. So on the other side, I agree with my 100%. Those projects really need to be, it's not just the business by itself. Other industry, we are probably saying, okay, this is just business. I mean, you invest in the manufacturing plant, you hire people, then you make the money, you're done. But this is much more, from my point of view at least, much more beyond just the business. It's the community joining together to make our future better. So this is not just as for the business. So it does need everybody's input. It does need everybody's participation. So as an example, I mean, one of the things could delay is that supply demand issue. I'm just using the solar installation as an example that we have experienced. I mean, you don't have a problem with a large utility scale, but when you come to the local community, for example, we have a program called Solar 1000. We want to install the solar panels. Actually, we donate solar panels to 1,000 different schools. We have the panel made. It's a mass production. It's a manufacturing plant. No issue. But when you go to the community, especially in the rural area, for those schools who does want to install the solar panel, the issue is the installer. They are still not necessary at the pace with this industry development.
Yep.
So they're not available. But to be fair with them, they're not available is because the market is not mature yet. They cannot just hire 5 people to the installation for the one school, then wait there for another 10 years for another program to come. It's just not going to work. So somehow we need to, as I mentioned, that we need to increase the awareness of the potential and to get the people more educated or more familiar with, I'm just say solar as an example. If everybody feels that it doesn't work at the beginning, when we talk to a lot of people say, oh, that probably won't work. It's just another sales pitch for you guys trying to sell solar panels, which is not necessarily true. I mean, EV is the same thing. At the beginning, they say there's, anxiety on the mileage and everything, how am I going to get a charge? Now the EV can be 15, 10, even 5 minutes for fast charge. But those are not necessary as recognized by everybody. There's still generation issue. There's still, a lack of the knowledge and understanding, which will delay, those projects.
I think what you're saying, and I think all three of you agree that we need to have close partnerships, close collaborations, public, private, government, policymakers, nonprofits, working together on these kinds of transitional issues, right? Nas, I know that you really care a lot about making sure that workers in the NHPI community in Hawaii are properly trained and ready for the new opportunities. But on the other hand, you talked a lot about the ups and downs that happen in this area. And I think they're not caused by business. They're not caused by one thing, by government, by permitting. It's about a nascent and still developing area. But in the meantime, how do we make sure that workers will be ready when we need them to be ready? So can you talk a little bit about how you feel about this community benefits agreement that Mai was talking about, and how you feel that could be assistive in terms of what you're doing?
Yes, Susan. This is a great question, and I would love to give my opinion on this and my mana'o. And, before I get into the community benefits agreement side, one thing I would like to add is the timing. A lot of times we're very reactive instead of proactive. And that is something that within my position within the Hawaiian Trades Academy, since I first came here, is we need to plan accordingly. When we see these market trends, whether it's new industries coming out, new jobs existing here in Hawaii, and then also the natural disaster side, the climate resiliency that I was kind of touching on in the past question. But timing is a big key in us building a pipeline before the demand even peaks, not after, because then we're reactive, right? So we need to engage with stakeholders. We need to engage whether you're at the government level, whether you're at the grassroots level, right? We need to bring everybody together. And so that is what I would like to see more of. And that is something that within my time here in the Hawaiian Trades Academy that we're trying to work towards. And on the community benefits agreement side, one of the most promising tools that we have is we always push that we should hire local. And that should be something that's in binding commitment agreements, whether it's developers, whether it's huge infrastructure projects here in Hawaii. And I would like to reference our work during the Maui wildfires. And so in September of 2023, the Hawaii Council as a whole, in direct response to the wildfires, we set up various programs on Maui to help the residents there. The Hawaiian Trades Academy was tasked to set up the Kako'o Maui Workforce Development Program. And the overall goal was to ensure that Maui was rebuilt by Maui, by the people that exist there, that live there, right? We don't need assistance flown in. We need the people of Maui to rebuild their own island. And so how this was achieved was we offered job safety certification classes, CDL training, all of these certifications and licenses that were consistent for these companies that were contracted to do the rebuild. And going through that experience, it really came to fruition that, this is something that we need to ensure occurs before these types of things happen, right? We need to make sure that these agreements are in place, this level of commitment from those who will be getting the contract, from those who will be heading these projects, that they know that the recruitment needs to start in the area that those projects will be happening, right? We need to make sure that residents of Hawaii are included into that, right? It shouldn't be, okay, let's look at contracting out, right, residents from the continent. Let's look at bringing in workers down here, because we have the talent here, but what doesn't exist is there's a lack of awareness for so many different types of programs here. And that is something that we're trying to bring to life. That's something that we're trying to help out a lot more within the Hawaiian Trades Academy, is that awareness piece. That is how we bridge the gap for a lot of the residents here that don't know about the types of pathways that exist, right? And if they don't know these pathways, then how are they going to get into these types of jobs, right? And this exists across multiple industries. And if those pathways don't exist, well, how do we build those pathways? How do we get, these stakeholders to the table? How do we have those conversations? Because the residents of Hawaii deserve more, right, from us, because we're in a position to where we can make an impact. But what good is that if we're not looking to the future, if we're not looking to be proactive and we're looking to be reactive? And so that's my stance on the current topics of how that can really benefit our residents here.
In terms of what Penn was saying around the fact that this is still a developing industry, how do you think that we can facilitate all of these piece parts so that we have enough awareness going to the community in the best way we can, that we therefore have workers ready for the opportunities, and that these projects can actually get built? Like, what are you seeing as a way to sort of juggle all of those concerns?
The responsibility of local government to really make sure, they're hearing and they're responding to their constituents' concerns, and they're also responding to the concerns of project developers. So I think this is where we really need to hold our local government accountable. So your city council members, your state representatives, et cetera, folks who work in agencies, for actually sort of doing this job of juggling between constituent voices and constituent opinions and sort of the opinions of some of the project developers that are coming. So I think this is where government becomes really important. And I also think this is where we can lean on NGOs. So like I said, this organization called Appalachian Voices, they are an NGO that basically wants to represent some of the communities where these projects are being built. So they can really serve in a lot of ways as facilitators, as sort of neutral facilitators that have the interests of the community at hand, but also can sort of translate between community interests and project developer interest. So I think this is really where civil society becomes really important, leaning not only on government, but also these NGOs that can serve as translators that have community interests at heart, but can also talk to project developers and help strike compromises.
Yeah, and Penn, I was wondering how you felt about this idea of a facilitated process where you bring all the stakeholders together from the private industry, business industry, government, NGOs. You bring everybody that needs to be at the table to strengthen the ecosystem around these topics. How are you feeling about that? And do you see that happening? And if so, can you point out, like, here's an example where that's really worked for you and your business?
Yeah. So, for this clean tech or this industry is very different from the other industry. We're involved in many different industries. So this is one of the industries that has its uniqueness. The uniqueness is that it's, as I say, it's as Maya was talking about, even NGO can play a significant role here. And the issue we have here today is while on one side, it's a new industry, everybody have to learn, it's going to take time for the industry to get more mature. But on the other side, the demand, I'm talking when I say the demand, I mean, the need to build this, clean industry is there. Every year we have worse and worse summer. You used to be able to go to this place, and I'm in Chicago, right? So the people from Texas will come to Chicago, say, "Hey, that's wonderful," but not anymore. We're going to have 100-degree tomorrow here. So this is an industry that everybody see the need. The question is really how we build. It's not necessarily. It's just a civic movement. It to the large extent has a business in there. But I agree with Mike talking about there's a government policy here. There's a NGOs participation here. There's a community's engagement here. And also business have to, again, I'm from the business, so business have to understand, if we want to see this get accelerated, we have to invest into all of those. We need to talk more with the government. We need to talk more to the NGO. We need to fully, engage with local community. In that way, everybody can see, anything when it's come to as a new stuff, there's always fears. There's always resistance. And, you talk about EV versus combustion engine. And in China, we saw at least those EV companies are more coming from the non-traditional automakers, because the automakers have a bag there. They kind of say, hey, let's wait, because I still have all the investment I already invested. I need to wait until I depreciate everything before I can jump on the new wagon. But the newcomers that have no bags, they're saying, hey, if this is the future, then let's invest in this future. We need to see, parties have different interests, have a different dimension to measure. But I think if we can have a more conversation, more open dialogue, more education, and, if nothing else, at least to get our next generation to be prepared. And so they can go home, talk to their parents, say, hey, the EV is not the monster sitting in the garage is going to caught on fire. And it's okay. The technology is matured. It's going to work. And in fact, with Tesla today, you don't have to necessarily, drive by yourself. You can really go to many different places just sitting behind the wheel.
I do that. I have a Tesla, and I'm telling you. Well, I'm going to go to NAS next because there's a lot of things that are getting piled onto your side, right? That organizations like the Hawaiian Council, NGOs, ought to be in a position to connect business and government to the community, to the end users, so to speak, to the employees. What do you need from the Hawaiian Council's perspective so that you can create that awareness, so that you can get ready for the next newest, best jobs coming down the road? And by the way, also in Hawaii, juggling the effects of our effect on the climate, right? In the face of extreme weather conditions that have been destructive to Hawaii. So, Nas, what do you need? Because a lot of people are saying what they need from you.
Yes, Susan. Thank you for asking this question because you're totally right. You're on the money with this. Our organization is involved in so many different types of areas, so many communities across Hawaii. And the Hawaiian Trades Academy workforce development is just one piece. But specifically for our program, there's so many things I can touch on, but there are key factors that I think would make a huge difference. And first is funding. As a nonprofit, right, and a program that falls within a nonprofit, funding is what dictates what we can offer, how often we can offer it, right? It dictates how many students we can serve. And so those are the various types of things that we're always thinking about. Is funding is what drives our programs. And so when it comes to funding itself, we need to secure flexible funding. And I say this because a lot of times they are restricted, whether it's private organizations, whether it's at the federal, state, city level. And when it's restrictive, it dictates what types of programs that we can do. And I think I've kind of touched on it before this question is we want to be proactive, but it is challenging, right? When we're subjected to only doing certain types of trades, because how can we prepare our residents here if we're subjected to doing only a few types of trades, right? And in the minds of these industry leaders, in the minds of those at the government level handing out this funding, they're thinking, okay, this is what makes sense in the job market now. But we can't always do that. They need to realize that there are so many jobs in the pipeline that will be coming in the next few years, but we need to answer that now. And so, that's a big challenge for us is when we are trying to look to the future, right? People aren't really ready for that funding at the moment. They're like, okay, we're funding, for instance, okay, we fund CDL, right? That makes sense right now. There's a national shortage of CDL drivers. But when it comes to the resiliency piece, like I was talking about, people are starting to slowly get into that mindset. This is what needs to be funded, especially here in Hawaii, but it's not where it needs to be. We need more people that are willing to support these types of academies. And so funding is always the biggest challenge for us. Second, we need to be more involved. We need to be brought to the table when big decisions are being made in these communities, when these types of projects are going on. And I say that from the workforce development stand piece, not because we want to be involved and dictate what's happening. We want to be able to kokua to help in any way we can. And the way that we can do that is making sure that if you folks on a specific project here need to bring in, whether it's carpenters, whether you're going to be doing a lot of hauling for the project, you need CDL drivers. We have graduate databases, right, that exist here. We keep track of all of our graduates. We want to make sure that they're consistently employed. And so if you need to tap into those types of labor demands, we can meet that demand, right? Because we have over 1,000 graduates that we have serviced since 2019. And these are all Hawaii residents. So how can we help? Be brought to the table to help with these types of these projects. And we're always looking to help out with these types of things, but we just need to make sure that we are brought to the table when these occurrences are happening. And lastly, when I brought up the resiliency piece, I mentioned that we need recognition, not in the sense of this is great what the Hawaiian Trades Academy is doing, what Hawaiian Council is doing, to be in the limelight with that. We need the recognition because when you recognize what we're doing here in our workforce development program, it really makes people see why this is important, why this is needed across various nonprofits, why it's needed in workforce development programs on the for-profit side, right? We don't want to be the only one offering this. We want this to start here, but eventually to expand. Right? And that's the lens that we look at. We want to make sure that what we're starting here can be expanded across various organizations because we understand we can't be the only organization that makes an impact. right? We need to bring in multiple efforts from multiple stakeholders. We need partners in this. We need community partners at the ground level. We need partners at the government level, right? And so the more people that we can get involved with these types of initiatives that we are trying to launch here, that is how we truly make a difference. And we're constantly trying to scale that because that's how you make the biggest impact for our residents here.
And I also think, we have talked before about the concept of roundtables, and I know that you have facilitated those in your organization. I hate to say that it should be a requirement because it sounds a lot like regulation. But on the other hand, if we don't initially and continue to get together, like I said, in partnership, we are not going to be successful. We need to make sure we are working together on each part of the process needed to develop this area. So, talk a little bit about the roundtables that you have seen conducted on your side. What's come from them? What can we learn from what you've been doing?
So our organization a few years ago hosted a roundtable focused on how organizations can get more underrepresented groups into their green workforce. So these are all environmental or climate organizations, and the roundtable is focused on how can we improve the representation of underrepresented groups in our own organization. And we have also in parallel done this work. We've done it in the clean energy industry, but we've also done it in the cybersecurity industry. And I think there's actually a lot of parallels between the two in that some of the recommendations from these roundtables were organizations. So this is sort of project developers themselves need to create apprenticeship programs for these new jobs. This is also true in the cybersecurity industry. B, create sort of entry-level points into these organizations. So one of the recommendations from our report is that you create a set of internships for some of these green jobs that can then translate into full-time roles. So have sort of formal intern to full-time role pipelines. And then another recommendation specifically from cybersecurity, but I think it can actually play a role in clean energy, is really thinking through what sorts of licensing and certifications are needed instead of and in lieu of having a bachelor's degree. So that is one of the ways that the cybersecurity industry specifically has really increased representation in their own industry. Is instead of requiring, hey, you need an associate's or a bachelor's degree, you instead develop these programs, and this is where college and universities can also, or community colleges can come into play, or trade schools where you develop these certifications that aren't necessarily 2 or 4 year degrees, but then showcase that you can do X, Y, or Z in the green workforce. So those, I think, are some recommendations that individual organizations can take on themselves.
And I'm going to go backwards around in the sequence and come back to you, Nas, in terms of, I'm going to go back to this community agreement because I really think that's important. I would assume that some of the things that I just talked about could be in a community agreement to ensure that we have a more equitable job opportunity scenario. We can't always say college education is required, but how do we also have apprenticeships? How do we have certifications? How do we get community colleges engaged? I just read an article. I mean, there's colleges now that are charging $100,000 a year for tuition. I mean, it's becoming inaccessible to the middle class, let alone to those who have less resources available. So, Nas, talk a little bit about, again, I'm thinking about this agreement. What do we need to do to make sure that there's equity in Hawaii and in other places where NHPIs and other Asian Americans will need some consideration?
Susan, this is a great question, and I always love when this topic comes up. And to be totally honest, right, and transparent, I have my bachelor's degree in sports management, right? I went to college for 4 years. I never went into the sports industry. Yeah, I'm working here in a nonprofit. I was in the Air Force prior to this. But what I always tell people that come to our classes, and most of them are transitioning. They're trying to transition into a new pathway, right? Which is why they come to our workforce academies. Is if you didn't go to college, that doesn't mean you're not successful, right? There are various paths that you can take after graduating high school. And if you go to college, that's great. If you go right into the trades, that's great also. But we need to stop pushing this narrative that if you don't go to college, you can't be successful, right? Because the trades industries the amount of wage or the high amount of wages that you can make in a very short time span is there, right? Somebody who graduates at 18 years old from high school, and by the time they're in the Ironworkers Union, shortly after high school in the pre-apprenticeship program, within 3 to 4 years, they are making between $70,000 and $80,000, right? And for me, coming out of college with my bachelor's degree, I had to go, okay, now I'm going to go interview for jobs, right? And that entry level employment, those wages aren't always right the best. And so we need to really stop pushing the narrative that you need to go to college. And I say this because when it turns into, or when it kind of bleeds into the employment pathway for our graduates here at the Hawaiian Trades Academy, is that I typically see a lot of companies ask for four-year degrees as part of their qualifications. And I always like to kind of be the mediator in that time frame, right? We're not a direct to hire program here, but we try our best and do whatever we need to do to ensure that our graduates are hired by employers in the industries that are relevant to the certifications and licensing classes that we offer. And the experience is really what matters to these employers. So a lot of times you will see those qualifications. Oh, we would like somebody with a 4-year degree on top of all this experience. But employers really need to understand that that experience that they have, a lot of times it's a lot more equitable than that degree itself, right? I just wish that it was more, that knowledge was more, I guess, apparent throughout the industries here, because that is kind of the hurdles that we have to help our graduates jump through, right? Those who haven't gone to college, but they have all the experience in the world to be successful as a heavy equipment operator, as an environmental technician with these companies. And that's what we saw a lot during the Maui wildfire rebuild as well. And so those are the types of things that I would wish that there was kind of a change in the narrative here. And another thing too is these certifications and licensing classes, right? We're seeing a lot of newer programs exist at the community college level, but we need to make sure that these apprenticeship programs, these colleges, there's a lot more investments, especially for Asian American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders, right? Because these are residents that they need to get into these jobs, right? To stay here at home, because it's expensive to live here. Hawaii is a very high cost of living. And the long-term solution to making sure that our residents are not constantly emigrating to the continent or elsewhere in the world is by ensuring that they have pathways to secure livable wages here and be able to afford to keep their families here. And so workforce development is the long-term solution to meeting that goal.
And Penn, this idea of having roundtables, I mean, whether there is a formal facilitator that's in place as we do this whole process, I'm not sure if it ever ends. How I assume that this is something that would be really helpful for your purposes as well, from the business perspective, to make sure you have a discrete time and place where you are going to get together with stakeholders and hash things out, inform each other, educate each other, get each other ready for this green revolution, so to speak.
Definitely, the roundtable is a great idea. And, again, you think about all the stakeholder here, right? Who gets the direct benefit the most is the business. So while others, are all very important, I think a business has to drive those. I mean, for a project, if we need to take 10 years to build, as Maya was talking about, your return on equity or your return on investment will be terrible.
Yep.
So it is to the business's own benefit that if we can have more participation through the roundtable from the community, that everybody can push forward, business itself can get a direct benefit. So from that point of view, in fact, one of the interesting angle here is that you talk about this is a very local topic. You're talking about local community. But on the other side, the clean tech by itself, it is a very interesting global business that you can learn from many other countries in terms of how you get yourself into the next stage and avoiding the learning curve. So from that perspective, look at the German at the early time for all the solar project. You look back in China for the battery business. And so it's not just, again, this is a business responsibility from my point of view. It's not just like, hey, I participate in the local community conversation and we get everybody excited. That's great. But in the meantime, we need to help the community to be able to look at on a global basis and to see what we can do in terms of the learning curve by, take a experience or lesson learned from the other part of the world. That is the reason. That is the reason why we put this program together with many, universities, and to say, hey, maybe if nothing else, we can gather those students, travel to other part of the world to learn how their industrial policy work in terms of clean energy. What is the technology? What is the training? What is the in terms of technology development? And that will help us to be more efficient back our home.
I really like that. And I was remiss in not remembering that it also takes the connection outside the United States to countries that where we can learn, whether they're more advanced, whether they have more experience, or even just because it's good practice to be connected. And I think business plays a big role in keeping everybody educated on the trends, on what's happening globally, while the community can then learn from you. So let's, unfortunately, I wish we could keep talking, but I would like to ask all panelists to answer this question, which is, and I'm going to start with you, Nas. How do we make sure that no one is left behind? We talked about some ways in which we can facilitate broader stakeholder engagement. But Nas, tell me, what are the couple things that you really need to make sure that in Hawaii, the NHPI, the Asian American NHPI community is not left behind in these new jobs, in this information dissemination, in education, in just being participants in this really exciting area?
There are 3 things that we need to do to make sure that no one's left behind. And first, it's the overall foundation, right? We need to fund that foundation. And when it comes to the green jobs, right, the green jobs industry here in Hawaii, people often think of solar installers, wind technicians, right? These are sometimes really you think of flashy jobs, but really the foundation of the green jobs industry, it's actually the skilled trades workers, right? And so everything that we have been doing since inception, since 2019, heavy equipment, CDL, carpentry, right? This is the foundation of ensuring that these green projects can be achieved, right? That can be completed. And it's not to say that we haven't offered solar. We have in the past. And we are making sure that we're monitoring the job markets because solar has been, really volatile up and down for the needs of the industry here. But I say this not to combat against green jobs, but we need to realize that the green jobs industry, right? The foundation is the skilled trades. And so even if you're not a solar technician, if you're coming in as a heavy equipment operator for these jobs, you are supporting the green jobs industry, right? But we need to make sure that we understand that this industry as a whole, it's a very big industry. Right? At the very bottom, the foundation itself is built on skilled trades. And so when we talk about getting people into the green jobs sector, that's what we need to make sure that we are allowing people to understand, right? And a lot of times we're not going to be able to graduate 100 solar technicians out of the Hawaiian Trades Academy in a year because the industry doesn't need 100 solar technicians at this moment, right? A big need here is the skilled trades. But at the same time, you have these green infrastructure projects that are coming to fruition very soon. And so that is what we want to do. And what we have been continuing to do is making sure that no one's left behind by making sure that they can get into these types of jobs to support the green jobs industry, to get into the skilled trades. And secondly, our pathways are free. Our workforce academies are free to our students that come through our programs, right? And we do that because we want to remove the cost barriers. And the cost barrier is the biggest reason why people are not able to go to college, to go to these workforce programs, right? Money is to pay for colleges when, a lot of the population that we serve, they can't afford it, right? So we want to make sure that we're offering it for free to them, removing that barrier, but also making it local. And when I say make it local is you want to make sure that it's also not a big distance, right, from the communities that you're trying to serve. And so we have, right, various islands here in Hawaii. If we need to offer workforce classes on Maui, Hawaii Island, Kauai, Molokai, Oahu, we want to make sure that we're offering these academies and making it accessible to our populations here. And that is a big one on how we can make a lasting impact. And third, I kind of touched on it within the Home Resiliency Academy that will be starting up soon, is we need to make sure that the communities that are hit the hardest are prioritized, right? That this population from those communities are prioritized for enrollment into these academies, that we do awareness outreach there for them, because they're going to be hit the hardest. So we need to make sure that these people in these communities, they have the knowledge to not only be successful in the workplace, but also for their own communities. They will be resources for their own communities. And when the Kona low systems hit Haleiwa and Waialua, the North Shore communities, they got hit very hard. You saw that the initial direct response came from those community members. The government stepped in after, but in that time frame, right, when everything is going on, these first responders are not able to get there until after, right, a lot of the devastation has happened. And so the people in the community, they are the first responders, whether it's your neighbors, whether it's trying to get to your ohana in the area. And so by equipping these residents with the tools needed to be successful in the workplace, but also to be able to help out their own communities, this is how we make a lasting impact, not just on the workforce development side, but on also the resiliency side as a whole.
Mai, what are you thinking in terms of things that you have seen work to make sure people aren't left behind? I know you talked about your agreement, and I'm actually loving that idea. I'm going to run with that elsewhere. But what really works? How do you make sure those gaps don't happen?
Yeah. So A, I think community benefits agreements are great. B, I think we really need to make sure governments and developers really need to make sure they are allowing community members to express their concerns and voice their concerns, and that both government and developers actually take those concerns into account before building or even proposing a project. And then last, I think the energy community, one thing that I think the energy community frankly does quite poorly is communicate the benefits beyond just climate benefits. Like, yes, we want to get to net zero because that is good for the earth. We'll have less heat waves, we'll have less extreme weather events. That may be good, but for the average person who is struggling to pay their rent every day, who's worried about job security, there are a ton of benefits for this green energy revolution for them too. Like, we are going to be, if we do this right, we could potentially get folks into really high quality, high paying jobs. Like, imagine you're someone who's living in West Virginia and you live in a coal mining town. Those are not necessarily great jobs. There's a lot of really hazardous effects of working in coal mines. But if you transition some of those jobs into clean energy jobs, you're going to have higher paying, higher quality jobs that will not only benefit the climate, but also benefit the economy and all of the residents in a community as well. So I think it's really important to make sure that we emphasize those benefits and make sure those benefits are actually realized when these projects are being built.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, let's make sure that people have the access, the talent, the abilities, the skills needed for these new jobs, because that's just going to help them prosper more. That's going to uplift communities. Forget whether it's clean tech or some other area. The fact that this is an exciting new opportunity for people to get good jobs is good enough for me. So what about you, Pin? How are you feeling about not letting people be left behind? How do we make sure that the jobs don't only go to people who always get the jobs, that we're thinking about all of the community members?
Yeah, I think, it's all started from equal opportunity to all the community. And the interesting part here, Susan, at the very beginning, you mentioned about, for the climate issue, the impact to the, relatively low income community probably is much more severe than, the others. The others can travel all over the world, can go to different place, whatever, right? But the relatively, underdeveloped community will suffer more. But that also means the demand there is even more important to or more significant compared to the other community. So if that theory works, then I would say business should invest in those area much more in the other area because the demand is there. So the question is that, do we have any other organization, for example, government policy, right? Can that help to build a bridge? So if you want to invest in this area, get a benefit from those investment, then the local community should participate more. So from that perspective, the door should open more for those community, that the people should have even more opportunity because those are local to local business. And the question is, we need to build a bridge for people come across. And from that perspective, the government, the NGO, and the others, even business by itself, should do a lot more. And that is, as I mentioned at the beginning, the reason we put this program together with many different universities. Some of them were specifically target the Black community, Black college, because for the kids to understand that is coming and to get a skill lined up for the future is very important. So if you want to talk about, nobody left behind, let's open the door for bring them all the opportunities so that at least they have a chance to learn.
And I think, shame on us. And I think, you talked about the role of government, to kind of facilitate this equity issue. And Pin, you're talking about that business ought to also carry the water on this. Shame on us if we're not allowing our economy to work as well as it should, which is to have more rather than less talented people that we can recruit from. I mean, we can only benefit if there's more of us, all of us, trying to get these jobs. I mean, this competition will help us be better. I'd like to do a lightning round as a final question to you all. This has been a terrific discussion, and I've learned so much. But the lightning round question is, what are you really excited about right now in terms of green tech, in terms of energy? Like, just tell me what makes your day every day when you think about this topic. And I'll start with my first. I'll go to Nas next, and I'll end with Pin.
Yeah, so I'm going to say 3 things, which I realize is cheating. So one, I'm excited about, there's a ton of work right now going into the first problem I talked about, which was clean energy projects taking too long to be built. So there's a ton of work going on in permitting reform, a lot of great organizations doing work, a lot of governments doing work. So I think we are going to see some of these projects being built more quickly and still in an equitable way. 2, I am excited about the potential for all of the new high quality, high paying jobs to come out of the green energy revolution. And 3, I'm also excited about this new swell of community engagement. We've already seen it with data centers, and I think we're seeing it in other energy projects as well, like really making sure that community voices are heard and their concerns are taken into account when these decisions are made.
Thank you. Nas, what are you thinking? What's the thing that's exciting you the most when we talk about these topics?
Yes, Susan. I'm so excited for so many things that we're trying to start up in the Hawaiian Trades Academy. So many new initiatives that we'll be launching within the next year or so. But something that I'm most excited for, and I touched on, is the Home Resiliency Academy. And for me, it's a whole vision that's wrapped up in this program, taking people from our most vulnerable communities, most vulnerable to disaster, and giving them skills to not only secure employment, to be successful, make higher wages, right, increased wages, right, so they can afford to still live here, but also being able to protect their own neighborhoods, right, with the skills that they're going to be learning, equipping them with these certifications to be able to respond to those natural disasters, all while opening up a career pathway into various types of trades. And like I touched on, we want to be proactive, and this is how we look to the future, right? This is how we ensure that we don't have to be reactive. And the bigger picture itself, right, is also the energy sovereignty piece. So Malia, which is a program here ran by my colleague Josh, and he's doing such an awesome job. They have been taking off, and they only started that program last year, right? And they've hit so many benchmarks, so many achievements within that short year, and we'll be partnering with them for this program. And I'm so excited for the partnership that we have in place and what this program is going to build into, because energy sovereignty, home resiliency, these are topics that are are so big in our communities right now, right? And we have to find solutions, and we need to ensure this is occurring here, because sovereignty isn't just solar panels, right, on roofs. It's our communities having the skills, being able to access pathways to skills in demand, being able to maintain their own energy future instead of importing the workforce, right, from elsewhere. That needs to come from here. And so when the demand is real for our solar classes, we plan on launching our certification academies for solar again, and then also diving into any other industry needs that might be occurring at that time after having these meetings, doing awareness with these industry leaders. But that's what motivates me every day, right? The possibility that this transition that we're looking at isn't just something that happens to our communities, but it's something that they're at the forefront of. They get to lead these initiatives. And that's what I'm most excited about, right? Making sure that we empower our residents here in Hawaii.
Thank you. And Penn, how about you? What makes your day?
Yeah. So if you want to be in the business, nothing's more exciting about the business that has a bright future. So clearly, this is the industry that the demand is tremendous. And unfortunately, all the weather changes, this demand is not going to stop. So that's very exciting because the opportunity is tremendous. The second one really got me excited is about this civic engagement. There's no other industry like this. You get so many people want to participate. This is a classic example here we're talking about. You have all people from different angles contributing for the same direction. That is very exciting.
So I'm going to try to summarize some of the learnings, at least on my side, that I've had from this panel. The first, over and over again, you all talked about the fact that we need to sit together and collaborate. We need to have many connection points, facilitated discussions, community agreements, ways in which we are essentially forced to be together as stakeholders to make sure that we have the workforce educated, trained, and ready for the jobs, that businesses have the conditions necessary so that they can get to business quickly, to make sure that we're not leaving anybody behind, and that with this opportunity, we actually can create a better future for everybody, because the economy will be more robust and will be better for everybody and all members. Secondly, we learned about the fact that we, as policymakers, have to make sure we are encouraging and facilitating and funding the processes that allow all of this to happen, whether it is to make sure that our NGOs have the money to do what they need to do to connect policymakers and business to the community, to make sure that the educational institutions are ready to train, to teach, and that businesses they have their eyes open and they're making sure that they're talking to everybody they need to in order to recruit the right workers, not just the easiest workers to get, but to help to develop that workforce for the future. So many more things that we learned. Thank you so much to the panelists. Thank you to APAICS for bringing us together. And we are very excited for this bright future.